Welcome everybody to today's seminar on operational excellence, and we'll get started by introducing today's speakers. My name is Darren Steele, currently helping IT Vision, and I've been working in operations intelligence for just over 20 years now. And I'm delighted today to introduce Dr. Mark Hodgkinson, who is a real thought leader in the world of operational excellence in oil and gas. Mark's worked at Babco, Caltex, and delivered operational excellence to refineries around the world. Mark will be giving most of the presentation. I have a couple of slides, but this is the agenda for today's seminar. And I think without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Mark. So welcome, Dr. Mark.
Yes, thank you very much, Darren. So we're going to try and talk about operational excellence today and make it quite applicable to many different types of businesses, not just oil and gas. So this first slide is just talking about why and what is operational excellence, and I always think OE is about having a robust management system, but then also operational discipline, which why it's so applicable to many different organizations, obviously particularly to high-risk organizations. So it's very important that people do the right thing the right way at the right time, every time. And this all puts together to help you get your business execution done properly. You probably should think, if you think in military terms, you've got strategy, you've got operations, and you've got tactics. So operational excellence is that operations and tactical interface of actually executing your strategy and thereby achieve your business aims. Next slide, Darren. Right, so what we're trying to show on this slide, and I won't read through it all, you can read it in your leisure, is that the focus of your OE will depend, therefore, on your strategy. So if you're defending, attacking, whatever, or in the business sense, if you're in a preserve and protect, so high risk. One of the companies I worked in was something like 70% of GDP of the whole country, so clearly that was preserve, protect. Continuously improve, which is a lot more common, so effectiveness, or nowadays, particularly with COVID around, we're looking for efficiency, and that means we have different types of approaches and different tools we would use in the operational excellence approach. So just picking two or three out there, so clearly a process approach, making sure that procedures are very clear in a high risk, whereas you might want to have multiple continuous improvement tools and programs if you're doing an effectiveness, and whereas you might want to apply Lean Six Sigma if you're looking at efficiency. So I think that shows that operational excellence is quite versatile. Next slide, Darren. So let's talk about some outcomes. So, as I said, the ones that I was working in is high risk and organizations. And so we were focusing on procedures and a robust management system, and also making sure that everyone does the right thing the right way all the time. And we're able to get a lot of success out of that. So this is built on these organizations I work for already had the ISOs and the OSISs and the various other management systems, but those management systems just weren't getting the results required. When we overlaid operational excellence above all those management systems and tied them together with leadership and behaviors, we're able to achieve very good data on our personal safety, process safety, and reliability. And so that was a great gain for us. Keeping it sustains, another challenge. You've got to keep coming up with ways to keep people focused, but certainly it worked for us. It's one of the reasons I feel obligated to talk to you today, is that this is an experiment that worked very well, and we've repeated it 2 or 3 times in different organizations and different locations now. So I think I can say with a surety that this process works. Next slide. And if we look at some underlying, like, leading aspects, so instead of those lagging data like I was just showing you, looking at compliance, so MOCs are management of change, and often people will raise an MOC and the risk assessment will be done, but there'll be overhanging actions done, and sometimes they can be over. In the organizations that we're in, when we started, this was quite a large number, in the 300s. When we started to apply operational excellence, we got it down to the 130s to the 100 marks, and when we applied technology assistant governance on top of that, we got it down to 0 or near 0. We'll talk about a bit of technology later that helped us do that, but you can see that we maintained our performance there. Next slide. Likewise with safety work orders. So safety work order in the computerized maintenance management system would be something like the operators do a safety check and find a safety shower's not working, or a hydrant's leaking, or some other safety device like that. So in the scheme of things, for prioritizing work orders, they get a slightly different flag on them, and it enables us to pull that data out and analyze it. I mean, clearly for morale of operators as well, there might be things that are more important to fix on the day, but you know, a safety shower that's not working perfectly will certainly affect the morale of the operators. So I think that's very important. And you can see here again, when we started to apply operational excellence, and particularly technology assistance governance around that, we drove that down, and that's been 0 since 2014, and that's been maintained. Next slide. So implementation, how did we do it? I guess that's why you're listening. So it's really just a plan, do, check, act cycle. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. I guess the difference is this vision and objectives part, and this grew out of Chevron's work, really. Many of the organizations that I worked with had relationships with the Chevron Oil Company. So it was about not just doing any work. The work you had to do had to fit the vision and objective. So if it was reserve or effectiveness or efficiency, there's no point applying operational excellence for the wrong reason. So vision, objectives, assessment. One thing that certainly we can help with is we've got these fantastic assessment templates for various processes that we've built up over the years, and even augmented that with the American Quality Council templates. And that allows us to assess and benchmark, and then planning, which basically is prioritizing. Implementation, we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then there's a review step. Some of it's half yearly, some of it's yearly, and some of it's every 3 years. And I think that fits between the management system process, which is this cycle, and we have some specific OE expectations depending on the site. And we'll go into those after. Next slide. So this is the way that the teams I've worked with and led over the years have done this. The reason we're showing it is, again, to repeat that we've applied this 3 or 4 times now at different refineries and sites in this exact same way, and it's worked. So one was key sponsorship and vision. So that's very important. we have a change management model that we work with. It's a little bit cross between ProSci and Chip for Change, which is a Chevron model. Then we interpret that vision for the workforce. I mean, management speak often doesn't land well with the whole workforce, and so something like the Toyota Way or some 3 or 4 easy to remember mantras or doctrines on the way we work around here. So just interpret that for the workforce, and that's surprisingly difficult to do that part. So I think every time we've done the program, people have thought that would just be an easy rollout, but it isn't. When you're sick and tired of talking about OE, people are just starting to listen. So you really have to communicate many different ways to get that in. Then form your team, then map all the processes to these templates that we have. So what you're trying to achieve, seeing which processes are missing, which processes might be required to be imported, or then assign owners and subject matter experts using a RACI diagram for each of those. And then do the gap assessments. And so, as I said, we have these matrices of deciding whether a process is less than satisfactory, satisfactory, or good. That's been built up over 20 or so years, and they're quite mature. Then there's an alignment step, and that's around getting people aligned to the reason for change, and ongoing fluency in coaching. That's always important. Like in any science, you can't proceed until people are talking the same language. In some cultures, we steered away from operational discipline, and instead, because it doesn't land well, we've used always do the right thing the right way, or something similar. And then the gap closure starts, and that's about designing the processes so they're more error tolerant, and building in human factors, and making sure that they're effective. And finally, and this is where the IT part really comes in, is doing governance, which can be particularly tedious unless you have technology-assisted governance. And I think that's a point of difference that Darren will probably talk about a little bit later. Next slide. So establish a vision, I talked about that. So here's a slide you can look at a little bit later, but the mantra on the bottom left there, excellence is about doing the right thing in the right way at the right time. Perhaps a little bit cheesy, but depends on the audience and where you want it to land. So like any change management, come up with a few of them and test them. Most importantly, make sure your sponsor is right behind it. And next slide, I think, Darren. Now, interpreting for the workforce. So here's an example. So having a vision and mission statement around OE may not land well with the troops. So in this particular one at Babco, we had this ABC, do it safely or not at all. There's always time to do it right. If in doubt, find out. So pretty easy to remember. And then we had a set of rules that we knew would take some time to be inculcated. But nevertheless, within about 3 or 4 months, we started seeing notes in the handover of the shift logs where someone would quote Usul Babco number 4. Usul, by the way, is the Arabic word for principle or doctrine, tenets, that sort of thing. They would quote number 4 and say, follow safe work practices and procedures, or perhaps safety number 3, that a safety device had been defeated or something like that. So it takes a lot of time and effort to keep this going, but it's very important that the mindset has changed, and little tools like this is a great way to do it. Next slide, Darren. Mapping the processes. Nowadays we use the American Quality Council's spreadsheets, which are applicable for many businesses. which is on the right, and there's a little bit of a graphic there on the left, and we used to tell a bit of a story about that. There was the house was built on a foundation of culture with that tool I just showed you, and there was various processes like HR and information technology on the ground floor holding up all these critical processes, were all the small rooms there, and then management systems in the roof and the ceiling. So there's various ways of depicting that. As you know, everyone is different. Truth is, there's probably only about 20% of people interested in putting all that sort of stuff together graphically. Some people like to read it, and some people just want to understand the mantra or the doctrine that they need to follow. But nevertheless, there's a time and a place for this sort of thing, and it's probably worth doing. Next slide, Darren. So I talked about these assessment templates for doing benchmarking, and so here's an example. So you'll see if you're looking at scope, purpose, objective down the left-hand side, procedures, roles, responsibilities for a particular process, then we have less than satisfactory, satisfactory, and good. So let's take procedures. So for satisfactory, we would expect daily work activities are consistent with design and consistently followed. Maybe some gaps, but risk evaluations are conducted to prioritize activities. But to be good, we would want that there's only minor deviations, and appropriate emphasis placed on identifying higher risk activities. And perhaps there's a different procedure for higher risk activities. Perhaps there's a buddy system bringing in human factors. So for both design and for effectiveness, we have these templates. So you can look at just the design, and then you can look at the effectiveness of the various processes as well. And as I said, they've been built up over many years and been used a number of times. And they're surprisingly less subjective than you would think. Next one, please. Next slide. So once you've implemented and you get to the end, I keep saying governance, and it's probably worthwhile me talking a little bit about what governance is. In this aspect, or we're talking about process governance review, so looking at the whole process. We're talking about maybe some little workshops. We found these are very effective, where we would go sit with the operators and talk about a particular process, say permit to work or lockout tagout, and get the operators to discuss what the controls are and what they follow. And it'd be always surprising to find out the shift to shift or area to area differences, and enable people to standardize themselves. Also, it's about CA is corrective actions and PA is proactive actions. It's about checking on those corrective actions. Are they getting done? Are they getting done well? Are they being verified? Likewise with the proactive actions. Of course, it's about looking at the metrics. And some people say, well, you've got too many KPIs. Well, probably you don't. You'd have your 4 or 5 company KPIs, but each process is going to have metrics. You know, permit to work is going to have metrics, lockout tagout is going to have it, recruitment's going to have, onboarding even as part of recruitment is going to have its own metrics. So don't be afraid of that. And KOPs stands for key operating parameters. So that might be something like the rate of crude oil coming in, or the rate of widgets being produced per hour. So these are important. Don't be afraid of those. If you've got technology, they're very easy to handle. And then process verifications, inspections and checks. In our language, in the oil industry at least, inspection is something that when someone does a verification and they're not from that area, and a check is where you do one in your own area, but essentially they're looking at the same thing. So it's not just about how many checks were done on lockout tagout or how many checks were done on confined space activities, but what were the results of those checks? What's the most common issue being found? what are we doing about it. So that all feeds into governance. And one thing I did want to mention, though, is each and every time we've started this off in organizations, we've found that it's quite difficult for people to work in a governance meeting. They want to get into problem solving, and so it's important not to do that. That's an action coming out of the governance meeting for someone to go and solve the problem. If you start doing problem solving, you'll end up being in 2 or 3 hour meetings, and you'll probably never do it again. Likewise, it's not a planning meeting. It's not, okay, this result's showing this, it's giving us this intelligence, let's change our plan. Again, that's an action going back to the strategic review and planning. So it's important when you're doing governance, essentially just looking at the dashboards, trying to ascertain what the health is in using various mechanisms with redundancy, and then assigning actions to make sure improvements are put in place. Next slide, Darren. So one other point is that we've seen in organizations where governance has been put in, say, like the health, safety, environment group put in governance. And that's important, you know, to have a peak body that looks at HSE or reliability or efficiency. They're all important, clearly they are. But we've also found that making operational governance, in other words, finding that organizational slice, usually at the superintendent level and sub-manager level. In the case I'm showing here, would be in an area level, or and getting the superintendents in with the maintenance people, the plant reliability specialists, the central reliability engineer, the technical people, whatever, and making sure that they have a meeting that once a month or once every 3 months, depending what it is, where they look at all these things through the eyes of the organization. And it's a great chance for the superintendent of operations to show leadership, because realistically all those other people are there to support operations. If you brought that over to different industries, say such as IT or HR, again, it would be, you know, you might have the medical people there because of medicals for recruitment. You might have various other people there, even if you're talking about HR functions. It's not just HR people that deal with HR, right? So I think that's important. We can certainly help you with that. It's pretty important to have that with technology assistance, because operations people don't have time to be preparing all these data to look at, and all these results and various aspects of governance to look at. So that's very important that that is automated. Next slide, Darren. So what were some secrets for us? Reason I'm speaking obviously is that we've had some success in a number of places, so we feel that we can relay that success to other people. Transparency of data worked for us in every single place. It didn't matter whether the culture, whether it was the Far East, the Middle East, Australasia, USA, didn't matter. When everyone can see the data, not just the managers, then that is a real breakthrough. And if you can see that as in all aspects of the data as tied to some information model that you can drill down from the, you know, the site level to area level to sections, and right down to units, and perhaps even down to equipment, then that's very powerful. Likewise, I think, and I'll repeat this from the last slide, I think governance at the right levels, very important, not just functional governance. I mean, that has its place, and it adds redundancy. to look through the whole organization for, say, reliability. But having the production people and the maintenance people and the reliability people, risk people in a room every now and then to talk about operational excellence down the organization instead of just across gives us a level of redundancy, and we've found that that's where the real benefit is. Often we've had invited guests to those. It's amazing, just an anecdote. So we usually invite an operator, and it's amazing how the word gets around. You know, the operator will go back to the shift and remark about all the things that are getting looked at. And pretty soon that gets around. Okay, next slide, Darren. All right, just talk about technology-assisted governance. So we promised these governance meetings zero preparation. So we had these automated reports using Siemens XHQ going to reporting services, and we found great success with that. We put that in the dashboard so anyone could run that meeting. Didn't need us there. Initially, we did have some OE people in the teams facilitating, and in one or two sites that's been maintained. In other sites where there was probably less people, that gave way to people running their own meetings. But this is the way that we did it. So you can imagine with a platform like Siemens XHQ on top of about 20 or 30 data sources all coming in to a layer in the repos and being sliced and diced and then presented to people such that no one has to go in and pull out data. So prior to the meeting, it's all there for the meeting. Next slide. So I think I'll give Darren, I'll get back to you, I think.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, thanks, Mark, for that. And yeah, I think now's a good time to talk about, you know, some of the systems that are involved in the technology that can be used to assist the having an effective OE management system. And typically most refineries around the world, you know, there's many systems of record in each refinery and most manufacturing facilities. And because there's so many different systems, you know, there isn't traditionally a single place where an end user, an operator, an engineer, manager there isn't a single place where they can go to look at the KPIs and the KOPs that they are responsible for. And so XHQ is used to connect to those different systems of record, whether it's a PI historian, whether it's a LIMS system, you know, whether it's a scheduling, production accounting system, whether it's an MOC or a safety system. You know, XHQ will connect to all of those systems and just to bring in the decision critical information that is required to support those you know, to support those KPIs. But there's still a gap, right? These end users need to define their own limit sets, their own targets. Each KPI or KOP that they're responsible for will have a different accrual rate, have a different reporting period. So there's some management needed around these metrics. And that's where IT Vision, we saw that gap in the landscape, and we created Vizion OE as an application. So a simple end user application to help them manage those targets and limits, and to help them define those KPIs and as well. So you know, so the workforce then have, you know, they don't really care where the data comes from, right? The workforce can just have a single place they can go to see, these are my OE related metrics. These are the limits and the targets around those. These are the deviations, you know, the weighted deviations, and it shows them where they need to take action, first of all. And And so, they don't have to worry about data wrangling. They don't have to worry about data preparation. They could just focus on their core competence and focus on addressing those OE opportunities. Anything you'd like to add to that, Mark? I think, sometimes people try to do this in the wrong system, or maybe think this can all be done in a historian, and we found that's not really the best solution.
No, I can remember wasting about 3 months of my life once trying to tagify all targets and limits. It was pointless.
Yeah. And in terms of the, there are different systems out there, and you can see Vizion OE covers not just time series data or tag data, but it covers different kinds of data as well, and different, a lot of OE related metrics, whether they're leading indicators or lagging indicators. It's going to come from different types of data, and it's important as well to have data that helps you decide what action to take, what can be done, what should be done about deviations on those OE metrics. And that's where Siemens XHQ comes in, because it's connected to all these data systems. Whenever there's an OE excursion, you can go into XHQ and see exactly, well, what do we need to do about it? What can we do about it? So that's where you get the decision support for the end users to close those gaps. And then you've got, typical business intelligence tend to be lagging reports published monthly or quarterly. And those tend to be done in, using the Microsoft technology stack. More recently, they're looking into, with Microsoft Azure, that, there's solutions coming out now for sort of real-time data streaming, and AI type plugins into that Azure landscape as well. If there are refineries out there that don't have Siemens XHQ, and I think they've got this kind of pairing of PI Vision for real-time data and business intelligence, Power BI for non tag data, and then they kind of have two different places to go to look at their data. But the refineries that have XHQ, it tends to be just, it's all done within that single source of the truth in XHQ. And the other thing to mention, is the last few years, the advent of advanced analytics. So now we can be even more predictive and proactive with data. So we can have leading indicators that give us anomaly detection. We can start to identify where things are starting to deviate away from normal, and then we can take action before those deviations become catastrophic or become a high potential incident. And again, that all helps to improve the OE metrics. So in terms of technology assistance, there's applications out there that we partner with that really help to automate a lot of the OE workflows. I think Dr. Mark's got some really great examples of these coming up as well. Okay, so let's. I think this is where we dive into those examples.
Yeah, we'll skip through this pretty quickly, but this is just an example of a front page of one of probably 70 so views in XHQ, and you can see the various parts of that, the way this dashboard was designed up. On the right-hand side was very important, so that was where we talk to the sponsor every month, and that would change the leadership focus areas. You might want to step through this, I think, Darren, a little bit. So for instance, if this example, we were clicked on management of change, you can drill down to the actual management of change form, and it's connected to the email client. Another important part was my activities. So how many actions do I have in incident investigation, MOC, various audit, behavioral safety, innovation systems, or whatever. So it's a great, instead of having to go to 10 or 15 different places to find all your tasks and or actions, we could bring them all in one place. So that was great. Also, the next slide I think shows you can look for an organization. So for instance, here we're looking at whether it's overdues, and we can look at the whole organization, so for the department, the section, and the work crew. And as I said, go to the email. This is a view of permit to work checks and lockout tagout checks. So the blue numbers are showing how many were done, but more importantly, on the right-hand side, what is the main issue being found in the checks? And then on the bottom, the ability to drill down to any particular checks and look at the comments. So very important that leading indicator might be how many checks you do, and lagging indicator is incidents, but there's another metric in the middle there somewhere about talking, well, what are the issues? Next slide. Here's another one. If you have a stop work authority, we had a very simple form in XHQ, just by hitting the little green triangle at the top of the screen, you can see there, and filling in a couple of things, and we tied that back to our behavioral-based safety or human factors process, and it enabled people to register when they'd done stop work authority. I mean, obviously, we never thought we'd getting 100% of them, but it enabled people to put those in. Often they were to do with the contractors, and we could learn by it. And that's something that comes out of an OE culture where people want to start capturing things, so their shift and the other shift can learn of it. Next one. Open work orders. So if we look at reliability here, so on the left is various types of work orders, whether they're predictive, preventative, corrective. RVs on the left there stands for relief valves. So how many relief valves are more than 30 days overdue their inspection? Well, there's none. That's good. ESDs, emergency shutdown devices. And this is all drillable. So you click on those numbers and it brings you a list to show exactly what they are. So again, you don't have to be an expert in the computerized maintenance management system. In fact, I mean, there are those experts, but you don't need to be. So everyone can get this data. The area specialists, particularly, and the engineers. Obviously, the maintenance guys probably use the base system because they know how to drive it so well, but everyone else, very easy to get this data. Next. Again, work requests. Before work requests are turned into work orders, there could be some hold-ups, so you can make various metrics to look at that. So corrective, predictive, preventative. As we progressed with our OE, we found that corrective actions, corrective work orders and requests went down as we started to get more and more preventative and predictive, which aligns with theory. Again, in the Asset Explorer, if you think about all the data that's linked here, you can go all the way down to a heat exchanger and then say, okay, show me all the work orders currently on that heat exchanger. Show me all the past work orders. Show me any MOC that's been done on that. Show me the lab results from that heat exchanger. Show me any incidents that have happened over the last X years on that exchanger. Show me the inspection records of that exchanger. So I think you're starting to probably get the idea that because everything's tied together and transparency is so clear, you don't have to go to a subject matter expert. So knowledge is not held tightly or hidden by just some people. It's out there for the organization, and it is the organization's information, so it should be shared. Next. Obviously, you get resistance to that, but that's why you need some change management. And shift turnover, I think I'll put that one back to Darren.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think what was interesting about that heat exchanger detail, the equipment detailed, that was an old example, I think, from more than 10 years ago. It was made using XHQ, and to me, that's one of the earliest examples of what I call a digital twin. From the the operational phase of an asset, and I think XHQ is probably one of the first systems to actually have this kind of digital twin. And in terms of the shift handover here and morning meetings, um, in most refineries that we've worked with, before XHQ and before the technology assisted governance that we introduced, that the morning meetings, shift handover meetings would be paper based. People would bring different spreadsheets, and a lot of the meeting would be, there'd be lots of challenges around, who's got the right data, and they weren't generally as efficient as they could be. And actually, when you look at several catastrophic incidents that have happened in the industry, you know, um, poor shift handover or inadequacies during those shift handovers, the failure to pass on critical information between shifts, was cited as one of the factors which contributed towards that high potential incident. And that's happened at many with many incidents. So it's important that that we use technology to help reduce the risk of that and help to improve the handover of information across shifts. And that's why we used XHQ and other systems to automate this process. So we automatically gather the information that must be exchanged. Any exceptions from the previous shift, any emerging anomalies, any open work orders or any safety work orders that are overdue. What work is going to be done on site, in the different plant areas and units in the next coming shift. All of that useful information, any operator comments from the shift logs, any observations that need to be followed up, and so all of that needs to be automatically prepared, so that you go into the meeting and everyone has all the information they need, and it's almost kind of like mistake proofing the process. And this is one example of the kind of content that you'd have in a morning meeting or shift handover meeting. The KPIs, and the KOPs, again, we set it up so that they're automatically calculated as well, and then we monitor for deviations away from the required operating envelopes. And this is, that was an example from an oil and gas facility. This is for manufacturing facility where there's a shift handover, information where it's sort of, there's some batch details here, the batch in progress, the status of those, any incidents, any predictive alerts, and also we show any the batches coming into plant as well as the shift comments, and you can actually look at for any specific batch, you can look in real time, the critical batch quality parameters, how are they, how are we doing versus the golden batch profile, and we can highlight any excursions away or outside of that golden batch profile. So another example of how we can use data to help us pursue those goals of zero deviations and zero harm, zero waste. And then there's another example here going back to refining, but this is equally applicable to batches. So there's an assumption that multi-blend optimizers, blend ratio controllers, BPCs are kind of doing their job and you'll have zero giveaway. Well, when actually you look at the last 60-80 blends of a particular grade, and look at the blend characteristics, and look at and start to analyze those and the blend quantities, you actually start to see quite a bit of variance, which can be translated into either reblends or giveaway. And so sometimes it's the best. You're working towards a best feasible plan, so you may not be able to avoid giveaway, but it's important to look at the end of blend results on a grade by grade basis and look at how successful are we, how much giveaway is there, because it may become significant and it may be an issue, one of those hidden issues. And in this example we're looking at unleaded regular 95, we could see frequency distribution there, the octane number characteristic that we want is, you know, around 90 is 95, right? Anything below is a reblend, anything above is giveaway. And so we've got variance charts there. We also track the Reformate, high octane Reformate addition as well, because that can be another source of sort of hidden cost. You know, where you're dosing the blend to bring it up to spec. You know, so you meet spec, but you've used, you know, expensive additives to get there. And then you know, so you've got the blend for that particular grade, and then you can drill down and look at any of those blends to get the blend detail. So you've got the initial blend instruction, the blend properties, any comments about those, the blend ratio, the component tanks. You can drill down to the component tanks that we used, and also the finish tank as well. So you can click on the finish tank and get the inventory information and quality information, the LIMS results for that finished tank. So again, another example how we can use technology to help us, you know, reduce giveaway, reduce waste. And then I guess this is one of the summary slides, Dr. Mark. So want to
yeah. So what we're another thing you can do. This is left this as last slide, but this is something when he just started doing for any single process. So let's just say recruitment, because everyone has recruitment. You can set up a dashboard for that that could have the process steps in it. Why? Because a lot of the young people now, you can't get them to read the procedure or the standard, so make it electronic, so have the steps. And because it's electronic, you can reference a link off to the reference document, which means you can then link off to the leading and lagging metrics. You can link off to the benchmarking. You can link off to costs or full-time equivalents for this process. What are the roles? Who owns this process? Who's the SMEs? What's the audit data? And so all these this technology can be applied to any process. It doesn't have to be a refining process. It can be any work process at all. So onboarding, recruitment, accounts payable, it doesn't matter. I think that's it. Next slide, Darren. So I think in summary, the lessons that we're trying to get across is proactive use of data allows us to do process governance, operational governance, and that way we get our best behaviors, right? There's many techniques and ways of doing that, but I think you can see that having some technology assisted ways of doing that certainly not only makes it easy to implement, but I can tell you it is the secret of it being successful long term. And I think back to you, Darren.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Dr. Martin. You know, it's and thank you for sharing. You know, your experience from delivering OE systems. You know, for so long. You know, it's a real pleasure to hear you talk about the subject today. And I think we've got a few questions that have been coming in. The first question is, okay, so how long does it take typically to implement an OE system at a facility?
I'll take that one. So we always use a 3-year program, and then another 3-year program on top of that to make sure and catch up on anything. But routinely, it's been 3 years.
Right. Okay. And another question is, you know, how to start? You know, where to start? Do you start with operational, or do you start with sort of back office? What's?
I think you start where the money is. So start where the operations, or if it's a marketing, or where the marketing is, if it's a marketing organization. So that's where you need to concentrate. Okay.
Okay. Then just another question about the systems and the technology assistance, and is there some sort of audit of the systems required?
You know, putting, say, XHQ in, people think that's going to take years, but all the projects we've all done has been 6 months or less. And, you know, putting IT Visions on top of that, that's like a no-brainer. It's like very quick. It's a month or less. Auditing, I've always found it very useful to have an external organisation coming in and looking at operational excellence to get a fresh eyes view. I'm an advocate of that. I think you can find yourself all singing from the same song sheet, and it's worthwhile having fresh eyes look every now and then and come in and do an audit.
Yeah. Well, I think we're just coming up to the end of the allotted time there, Mark. There are some other questions, but I think we'll take those up separately. I'd just like to say once again, thank you very much for your time, Mark, and thank you to everybody who joined us on the seminar today. Please feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll send you a copy of the recording, and you're more than welcome to have PDF copy of the slide deck as well. So, and also please don't forget we have our next export webinar coming up soon, and that's around Seek and advanced analytics for operational certainty. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Dr. Mark.
Right, see you all.